Hello and welcome to another Macstaff Live. Very grateful to have you with us today, whether you're watching us on LinkedIn or YouTube. As always, I've got with me Anthony McCormack, the Managing Director of Macstaff. Hello, Ant.
Hi, guys. Good to see you, Martin, and hi to those online.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Ant introduce today's special guest. Over to you, Anthony.
Yeah, it's definitely a privilege. Appreciate your dropping by, John. Intros wise, John, I've known for a few years now. He's the founder and co-director of ATP. I'll get him to say what the story on that as well, because it's not just like another XYZ recruitment. It's got a purpose to it as well. He's a fellow director at Team, the employment agents movement, where we kind of hang out with lots of recruitment professionals, and kind of well known, I think, as a STEM advocate and all-round nice guy, I think. Hi, John.
John,
thanks, Ed. Good to be invited to today's discussion. And so I've been recruiting I've just entered my 30th year of technical recruitment, and I'm not going to bore you with all my bits and pieces, but ATP, to give you a flavour, those initials stand for all the people, and it's all about us providing a recruitment route for everybody, and I mean everybody, from young people through to our older generation workforce people, and minority groups that are underrepresented in STEM sectors, and even down to schools and getting students and quite young kids to look at careers in STEM, and that's my thing. So all the people does hopefully mean everything that says.
Great stuff. Well, you're very welcome, John. Thanks a lot for your time today. We're talking today about one of the issues that's dominated lots of economic, political discussion over the last 18 months, and that's workforce shortages in the UK. Interesting to pick your brains today, both of you, to ask really, has anything improved recently? What are the reasons that we're in this situation? Is it as simply putting it down to the Brexit situation? And where do we go from here with the amount of skill shortages we've got, and how can that be overturned? So let's start, I guess, with one of those issues, the early retirement of baby boomers, made worse by the pandemic when people just didn't go back to work. There's a huge loss of experienced workers there. John, let's start with you. How big an effect has that had in the situation we're in at the minute? And just briefly, your summary of exactly where the country is at the moment before we start getting pretty.
I think my views are going to inevitably be controversial, and there'll be people out there that disagree with me. So, and I do read and listen to a lot of views, but I think on the positives, what I would call the COVID bounce. So this is where companies who went into almost like sleep mode because they just couldn't operate as organizations, that's come back with a vengeance, and the demand for staff has gone up gigantically. I mean, I think it was 6 months ago, I think the UK PLC had more vacancies open than at any other time since records began, and that was according to the National Statistics Office. So that's a good thing, and that shows there's a lot of career opportunities for people. The downside, I think, is twofold. I think Brexit, we lost 1 million workers, went back to their European countries of origin, which, I mean, that's a gigantic. I mean, and we're not talking just about low-skilled workers either. It's PhD qualified candidates who are in very senior and advanced technology vacancies simply returned back to Europe, and I understand why they did that, and that's caused a huge gap in our vacancy base. And then the third component that I think is something that's really important is this cost of living crisis. It is real. It is. I do some charity work for outside of work for a food bank in Horsham, and the demand on their services is again off the charts. They just are. They need even they can't even hire volunteers to help them get the food out to families who are in awful problems. What that impacts on me on a day-to-day basis in my professional career is the demand on salary and people's expectations in money, benefits, that work-life balance. You know, there are a lot of people who only want to work from home now, which isn't always possible. But the hybrid work pattern seems to be the compromise that seems to be occurring. So those are the three things that I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis, and from what I'm seeing, as I say, outside of work and my volunteer work.
Okay. I mean, that interesting fact, just flip this over to Ant, but as John just said there, 1 million people leaving the workforce. Take that historically or look at other countries, it's something that hardly ever happens to anybody. And that's just the size of the place, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've got the kind of the demographic of the aging population as well, whereas the core workforce is supporting more kind of non-working population, like children and retirees and things like that. But the recruitment market's certainly been very tight, and we've talked about skill shortage. Is it going to end? And no time soon, I think, is the kind of conclusion on that. Maybe Brexit. I mean, I concur about the kind of million missing and things like that. Sometimes for political reasons because of Brexit, sometimes economic reasons, to do with exchange rate and things like that. Some people got kind of blocked from returning, like when there was lockdowns, and just kind of never came back. So also we've got an issue of, like, I think it's 500,000 people that are kind of economically inactive as well, and there's a few different reasons for that as well. So we've got people staying in education longer, so tons of people doing master's degrees and things like that weren't available for their first step into the workforce. There's early retirement people that you've kind of specified, and there's the literally departed people from the COVID as well. There was over 100,000 deaths, remember, and some people are sick. There's a mental health crisis. There's a lot of people wait NHS, and it's kind of not helpful. Yeah, when there's 1 million vacancies out there as well. And for what it's worth as well, I think there's roughly 1 million vacancies and 1 million unemployed, and they're just not compatible with each other. It's round pegs and square holes, and that's where I suppose we're going to come on to the workforce planning thing of how do we try and get some kind of a match. Like, is there like some coherence with this? Like, whose job is it, and like, have they messed it up, sort of thing.
Just specifically, Anthony, about the issue about early retirees or people not returning to the workforce. How easy or difficult is it in both of your experiences, specifically in your own recruitment work, for the skills to be passed from those people down to a younger workforce that's coming in? Is it something that we just do normally, or is it something that's a real challenge? John, start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Martin. I think it varies on the employer. I think if the employer has got a good knowledge sharing culture where they are genuinely mentoring, coaching and training their younger workforce joiners, whether they be having just joined the business or they're just on their career path or transferred from their initial department to another one through an internal application. That's the key. And I think the companies that will benefit have got a solid knowledge and coaching sharing environment, and that will work. I think the companies that don't have that in place, they're the ones that will suffer. Yeah,
interesting. And then we often criticise whatever age we are, whatever sort of gen we are. We're always saying the youngsters haven't got what it takes these days to move into these jobs. What do you find from the youngsters that you deal with at work?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something about the next generation kind of being ignorant and lazy or something like that. And it sounded like something from last week, but it was Socrates. And we've been moaning about the next generation like for thousands of years.
Should we be particularly worried by this new generation coming in?
Well, it's just different. It's there's no kind of 50 years and a carriage clock employment anymore. It's people, both sides realize it's got to be a win-win situation, and people stay where there's mutual benefit, basically. So it's like John's saying, it's down to the employers to be proactive and attract these returners. For a start, could be the people who've kind of taken early retirement, who are people who were maybe laid off during the pandemic as well. They didn't need the money, or they took a voluntary redundancy, got a package, so they're sitting on the sidelines. They're not got their back against the wall financially. And they've waited it out. But I suppose ironically, and like good news, bad news, the cost of living crisis have forced some of these people back in as well, because the nest egg's not going to last forever, sort of thing. There's another category in here as well, like contractors. I think with the IR35 reforms, there's not as much tax advantage available of being a limited company, I suppose, put it in layman's terms. And some of those people aren't happy with the new deal, so I'm not going to take my next contract. Then they're withholding their labour as well, waiting for the rules to change in order to come back in as the victors, sort of thing. And then in a roundabout sort of way, to answer your question, the next generation or the younger people are more demanding. There's more information out there. There's more choices out there. So, there's not a blame thing. It's just different. And the companies do need to work to understand and engage them for recruitment and retention in order to, keep that win-win scenario. And it is a great case study that kind of John alluded to as well, of an aerospace client that he deals with that have been particularly good at that kind of succession planning, because that is the career development and plan for the new employees then, isn't there? And as you said, Martin, the challenge is to recruit the people at the entry levels, but also have them ready to take on the leadership roles of the future. And while I'm at it, that's a big challenge in the market as well, because there's a limit to the volume of graduates or junior level staff that you can recruit and onboard and train, like if there's a lack of leadership there, or if there's a limiting factor in terms of the ability to kind of manage and train and develop these people as well. And a lot of the more senior people are enjoying this hybrid arrangement that we've talked about as well, and they're working from home and they're not available kind of full time to to coach and nurture the person who used to be sitting next to them and now isn't as well. So it's complicated. I better stop.
Yeah, terrible, man. Talk about those people you just spoke about, the graduates or people that are coming out of school to enter this workforce. Are we doing enough for them, those people at the moment? We can say they've got different demands and they're after different things out of life, but are we doing enough to train these people to be able to enter the workforce, to be in a position where it's actually going to help the country get out of this mess, let's say? John, we were talking earlier, John, weren't we, about you actually going into some schools now to talk about STEM futures and STEM careers. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So if I'm perfectly honest about it, the best thing I do in my day as a recruitment professional is go into schools. I do about one a month, and it's usually for between 30 and 60 minutes. And I'm particularly keen to present towards sort of the 10 and 11-year-old kids, because that's proven to be a time period in their lives where they're going to start to make long-standing decisions as to what they want to do when they've left full-time education. And I must say the attention and the engagement I get from those schools, and this is schools at all levels, both at state and at fee-paying environments, is fantastic. I have never. I've been doing this for about 6 years independently, and prior to that, and I still work with them as well, there's two charities, one called Satro, who do Surrey and Southeast London based STEM career promotions at schools, and on a national level there's an organisation called Teen Tech that's headed up by Maggie Philbin. For those of a certain age, we might remember her from Tomorrow's World.
Yeah, unfortunately I do.
Yeah, well, Maggie's been doing STEM career promotions to schools for longer than I have. I think 15, maybe 20 years now. And I've been to many events that she does both regionally and nationally, and they're fantastic. And we take surveys at the start of the event. These are usually all-day events that are done regionally. And it's often a survey that's done with the kids before they get there, in terms of what their awareness and desire to work in STEM and their response, and what changes they've made in their mind at the end of that event, and realizing that there's some really interesting companies out there. If I can get one student in half an hour at one school to decide that they're going to go down a STEM career, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And because if we can do that, I think if we approach it on a fractional basis rather than an overnight solution, I think that's a far more realistic way of doing it. Going into schools, I think that's vital, absolutely vital, because none of the problems that we've got in this country, and indeed worldwide, STEM skill shortages is a global problem. It's not limited to the UK. Is gigantic, and I think if we can address it at schools, then we're taking a far more medium to long term approach to solving it.
Yeah, Anthony, good idea. John going into schools and.
Yeah, 100%. I kind of really respect that. I've wondered about it myself, but I'm a bit too scared of the audience. Yeah. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it's a tough crowd, believe me.
But what I do think as well is that there's we do need to engage like all stakeholders, really. It's government, it's kind of schools, universities, recruiters, like parents, because I think to a certain extent, and just exaggerate to be controversial, it's like a load of the students are just like lemmings, like heading through the kind of GCSE A-level degree, like, and then potentially fall off the cliff like at the end because it's not been in the right direction. I think the workplace has changed dramatically. Like education's changed a little. Universities are, I guess, partly selling what they're good at and what they like to deliver as courses, but also they're selling what's in demand, which is quite often sexy subjects like marketing or photography or sociology, psychology, things like that. But that's not necessarily where the big money or the volume jobs or the future of technology in the workplace lies. So somebody's got to ring the bell, haven't they?
Yeah,
absolutely. We've just spent sort of 20 minutes discussing what the problems are. I'm going to ask you now to get your crystal balls out, both of you, and start coming up with some solutions, which are obviously not that easy, else they'd have been undertaken already. So, John, where do we go? Can these issues be fixed short term? Is it going to take a long term approach? How are we going to have to tackle this, and who's going to be involved? No pressure.
Yeah. Are these problems going to be solved overnight or short term? No, they're not. And I think going into schools is the start point. I can't do it on my own. It's got to be done on a far greater scale. Although I am conscious that there are other industries out there other than STEM. So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul at some point, isn't it? So tomorrow's engineer could have been an accountant, for example.
Yeah.
I think the solution in my mind is twofold. I think it's getting the minority, the underrepresented elements of our communities into STEM, and I'm talking about girls, and I'm talking about minority ethnic groups who perhaps have got a path that they think it is going to go in another direction. And I think the third area is deprived areas in the UK. I mean, I sponsor a student to finish their A-levels in Southeast London. And London's got certainly in the south and southeast areas of London, there's an acute shortage of tertiary advanced educational opportunities. So sixth form colleges, there's not enough there. So that's the bit that I think is important. And then my daughter came home from school 2 weeks ago at the end of school, and they did this end of term debate, and it was about choosing the next prime minister within their school year. And she asked me, what would I do if I was prime minister for the day? Because that was basically what it came up with on this debate. And I would take an element about the Scottish system in terms of funding for universities, and I would make all STEM courses free. That would be what I would do as prime minister for the day. That would be my executive directive to free up funding for free STEM courses, and I'd have to do it, and I'm talking 15 years, funding for 10 years minimum, and that would make a difference in my view.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you do if you're Prime Minister for a day? You knew I was going to ask you that. So don't say
yes, since like 5 seconds ago, and John threw the gauntlet down.
When John started saying that.
So I suppose like to go with a related kind of point, and with a construction hat on, like my kind of bugbear, I guess, is that and it starts at the kind of after GCSEs level. It's this education still splits into 2 paths, like the vocational and the academic, and the vocational like is somehow seen to be like second best, whereas that's what like people should be like heading towards as they kind of ready themselves for the workplace, isn't it? So I think more investments and attention to post-secondary education for like trades and things like that. So the plumbers and electricians and carpenters and things like that, they're actually a lot of the time having the last laugh in terms of that they're insecure, like high-paying employment, whereas the history grads and there's many other examples. Coming out of the end of their degree 50 grand in debt and struggling to find the right opportunity. So I think there's a win-win there in terms of apprenticeships and even degree level apprenticeships as well. So I'd put funding kind of that way and create a much more closer relationship between the apprentice providers, because a lot of confusion and kind of variety in terms of there's loads of different kinds of those. So get closer relationships between the universities, the apprentice providers, and actually do some workforce planning. I mean, that was the title, wasn't it? And it's a big subject, but there needs to be some coherence between, it's just literally the definition of planning, isn't it? It's like, where do we want to get to in terms of the size and the shape of the economy, and how are we going to achieve that in terms of kind of workforce and employment? So, I mean, we've discussed in kind of previous lives, haven't we, about politics and things like that. And I'm traditionally a bit of a kind of a small state, free market kind of Tory guy, but I do see the benefits, and looking at the Nordics and things like that, of having more kind of central control, because it can't be coherent otherwise. It's just a whole bunch of people chasing their own kind of short-term goals, isn't it, really? So we need some thought and planning, but I don't know how to achieve that. Sorry.
So sort of on the back of that, let me ask you this to finish with, fellas, because the things we've spoken about today paint not doomsday but long-term solutions to the situation we're in. Can the country get out of the hole it's in without sorting out the workforce issue, or is that intrinsic to where this country is going to be in 5 years? John?
Well, what a tough question to answer, Martin.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. This is where my ignorance is fully exposed, and I'll never be invited back onto the web again.
You're in good company.
You hear that everybody's saying these are long-term problems and we can't solve them. So what can we do to try and drag ourselves out of this stagnation and low growth that's blighting the country at the moment?
I think as a quick fix, I would make it extremely easy to get a work permit if you're an EU national, regardless of your skill set, whether you are, a basic skills level person, crop harvesting type operative, up to a degree qualified professional, whether it be in banking or tech. And I think you've got to make that easy. You've got to get those million, you've got to make it attractive and easy for those million workers to come back. And I don't think there's anybody in the political arena that is brave enough to say maybe we should look at returning to the EU. Whether the EU will have us back or not is another matter. But I think it's been universally acknowledged that Brexit was Brexit. It was democratically voted for, but it hasn't been taken advantage of. The position that we were meant to be in terms of being able to make our own decisions and economic choices and planning hasn't come through. So we're basically we've lost all the benefits, but haven't created any new opportunities as a country. That's so as a short term. Quick and easy work permits.
Okay. And your overall view on that, and also, is any politician brave enough to even introduce quick and short-term work permits, let alone revisit the Brexit debate?
Yeah, we'll have to see what they come up with, like with manifestos for the next election, won't we? And I mostly agree with John as well. And thanks for kind of like flagging the elephant in the room, isn't it? I don't think we have to rejoin the EU, because the likes of kind of Norway aren't EU either, and they don't have a problem attracting in the kind of right people for their kind of future growth. But definitely the free movement of labour needs to improve somehow. Like, so yes, slick visa or permit system would be a quick fix. Otherwise the maths just literally doesn't add up, does it? We've got a shortage of people in pretty much all kind of areas and levels and occupations, and it'd probably be wrong to try and influence the birth rate, wouldn't it? But that's not going to do anything for 20 years anyway in terms of workforce planning. So yeah, immigration, and it becomes a political hot potato, doesn't it? Is literally the answer. You can tinker around at the edges with the kind of getting like parents to return to work quicker, or encourage people to work till they're 70 instead of 65 and things like that. But I think we need to get a head around the fact that like an Australia or a Canada, that our competitive advantage like literally depends on being a choice destination for highly skilled immigrants, and it's a different issue to the illegal, which is even not necessarily correct, is it? Immigrants, that becomes the negative connotation. It's like we need the skills and the ambition and the energy to kind of reignite what we've got going on in the economy, because we have, as you rightly say, like productivity issues which go back decades.
I think it'd be really interesting to come back in a year to the day and revisit what we've talked about today and see what's been done in the interim, and then maybe those manifestos would be out and we can see. Really interested to see what would happen in 12 months worth of progress or non-progress, as the case may be. But we'll have to wrap it up there, fellas. I know we could go on for a long while, but just a big thank you from me for both of your time today. And John, just remind everyone where they can find you and your work.
Thanks. My website is atptechnical.com, and my LinkedIn is John Docherty 2. That's a digit 2. I'd be glad to engage or talk to anybody that we can look at ways in which we can join me in coming into schools. I've got a couple. I promote STEM heroes, both people who are hopefully that students can relate to, and they're starting to agree to come in with me. So and share their work experience in the STEM career sector. So reach out and I'll be glad to talk to you.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate your time today. Anthony, thanks very much again for your time as ever.
Yeah, awesome. It was fun, Martin, and we didn't even really get started, did we? Again, concur. Thanks ever so much, John. I've got tons of respect for John from work I've been privileged to do with him at Team. Thanks very much for your time and your busy schedule and your insights as well.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Just leaves me to wrap up. Just remember, if you've enjoyed today's live broadcast, we've got loads more stuff on the Macstaff YouTube channel for you to browse and peruse and hopefully learn from. Topics such as how to build a winning brand in recruitment, and also things like, does it really matter who's running the UK? Worth checking out. If you want to find out a little bit more about Macstaff, you can go onto our website, or you can find Anthony on all the socials across Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. And that just leaves me, Martin Crowson, to wish you all a good day. And thanks once again for joining us here on Macstaff Live. Bye-bye.